Hello and welcome. Find that quiet corner of your world, a place where the present can fade and the past can speak. Settle in and let your mind drift back with me, across an ocean of time, to the wild, windswept shores of a continent that was, to European eyes, a new world, a blank slate upon which empires could be written. Tonight, we journey into the heart of America's oldest and most haunting mystery. It is a foundational story, a tale of ambition, of courage, and of a disappearance so complete, so chillingly silent, that it has echoed through the centuries, becoming a ghost story woven into the very fabric of the nation. This is the story of the Roanoke Colony. But this will not be the simple telling of the legend you may have heard as a child. The tale of 100 settlers who vanished, leaving behind only a single cryptic word carved into a post, is merely the opening chapter. That single word has long been seen as an ending, a final unsolvable clue. But what if it was never an ending at all? What if it was a beginning? In recent years, the patient, painstaking work of historians, scientists, and archaeologists has begun to unearth new clues, pulling secrets from the very soil that has held them for over 400 years. Tonight, we become historical detectives. We will sift through the evidence, examine controversial artifacts long dismissed as hoaxes, and follow the trail of new discoveries made possible by modern technology. We will explore the field of historical archaeology, not as a dry academic subject, but as a living, breathing investigation. And in doing so, we will confront a question that was once unthinkable. After 4 centuries of silence, is this great American mystery finally ready to give up its dead and tell us its story of survival? Our journey begins, as it must, on the turbulent waters of the Atlantic. The year is 1590. For 3 long, torturous years, John White, an artist and a governor, has been trapped in England, a prisoner of war and politics, a world away from the colony he was meant to lead and the family he loved. Picture him on the deck of a pitching ship, a man in his 50s, his face lined with anxiety, the salt spray a constant, stinging reminder of his failure. He is an artist, a man who built his life on observing and capturing the world in delicate watercolors. But his world for the past 3 years has been one of blunt, brutal frustration. He had departed from his settlement on Roanoke Island, a sliver of land nestled behind the treacherous Outer Banks of modern-day North Carolina, in the late summer of 1587. It was meant to be a swift return journey, a mission to England to gather more supplies, more people, and to report on their progress. He had left behind 117 souls, men, women, and children who had gambled everything on the promise of a new life. He had left behind his own daughter, Eleanor Dare, and he had left behind his infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, born on that island just days before his departure. Virginia, the first English child born in the New World, a tiny, fragile symbol of a new beginning, a living embodiment of hope in a vast and intimidating wilderness. He had looked into their faces and made them a solemn promise. He would return by the following spring. But the grand ambitions of men are often dashed by the realities of history. As White prepared his relief fleet, King Philip II of Spain launched his invincible armada against England. Queen Elizabeth I, facing the greatest threat her nation had ever known, issued a decree commandeering every seaworthy vessel for the defense of the realm. White's mission was scrubbed. His ships were seized for the war effort. For 3 agonizing years he was grounded. He petitioned the Queen, he pleaded with her powerful ministers, he wrote desperate letters to his patron, Sir Walter Raleigh. He watched as the seasons turned, as spring of 1588 came and went, his promise turning to ash in his mouth. Now at last, in the summer of 1590, he has found a way back. It is not the grand relief expedition he had envisioned. He is a paying passenger, a guest on a fleet of privateering vessels, legalized pirates, whose primary mission is to hunt and plunder Spanish treasure ships in the Caribbean. The rescue of the Roanoke colonists is a secondary concern, an inconvenient detour. As their ships near the American coast, a fierce late-season hurricane descends upon them. A violent welcome from the very land he yearns to reach. Feels like a terrible omen. Finally, on August 18, 1590, what would have been his granddaughter Virginia's third birthday, they drop anchor off Roanoke. As twilight bleeds across the sky, White sees it. A great plume of smoke rising from the island, a thick column against the darkening trees. His heart, heavy for 3 years, leaps in his chest. A signal fire. It must be them. They are alive. They are waiting. He orders his sailors to sound a trumpet call across the water, its brassy notes cutting through the roar of the surf. They shout, they call out. They begin to sing familiar English folk songs, beloved tunes from home, their voices carrying across the waves. A desperate attempt to elicit a reply from the shore. The only answer is the mournful sigh of the wind and the ceaseless crash of the waves. The silence from the island is absolute, a heavy, unsettling blanket of quiet. The next morning, under an anxious, overcast sky, White and a small shore party finally land. They walk the familiar path toward the settlement site, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The first thing they find is an absence. The cottages he helped build, the humble homes of the colonists, are gone. They have not been burned or violently destroyed. They have been systematically dismantled, taken down with care, plank by plank. The entire settlement area is now enclosed by a high defensive palisade of thick tree trunks, a fortification they had been planning to build just as he left. This tells him something crucial. Whatever happened here, it was not a sudden panicked event. They had time. They had purpose. He scans the area. There are no bodies. There are no scattered bones. There are no signs of a struggle. No scorch marks from a battle. It's as if the entire community had simply packed up and moved on. Weeds have begun to reclaim the clearing. Small cannons lie half buried in the sand. It is a scene of eerie, orderly abandonment. But they did not leave without leaving a sign. Carved deep into a main post of the palisade in clean Roman letters is a single word, Croton. White stares at the carving, his mind racing. This is not a random scrawl. This is the message. Croton was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, about 50 miles to the south. More importantly, it was the home of a friendly Algonquian tribe led by a man named Manteo. Manteo was not just an ally. He was a trusted friend, a man who had traveled to England, been baptized a Christian, and named Lord of Roanoke by the English. He was their bridge to this new world. Before White had sailed for England, he had established a clear contingency plan with the colonists. If they were forced to move from Roanoke Island for any reason, they were to carve the name of their destination into a tree or a prominent post. And he had instructed them, if they were leaving under duress, if they were in danger or distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the name. White's eyes scan the post again, searching every inch of the wood. There is no cross. A wave of profound relief, fragile but real, washes over him. This is not a message of death. It is a message of survival. They were not slaughtered. They were not captured by the Spanish. They had made a calculated, logical decision to move. They had gone to live with their friends, the people of Croton. To John White, in that moment, the mystery was solved. All he had to do was sail 50 miles south. Nearby, another sailor points to a tree. There, another carving is found, just 3 letters. Cerro. It appears they started to carve the message there, but were perhaps interrupted, or decided the main palisade post was a better, more obvious location. Every piece of physical evidence points to a deliberate, orderly relocation to a place of safety. But the sea, which had carried him across the ocean, would prove to be his final, cruelest enemy. As the sailors prepared the ships to sail south to Croton, the hurricane that had been lurking offshore returned with a furious vengeance. The wind howled, the waves grew to monstrous size. A crucial anchor cable on the flagship snapped, and the anchor was lost to the deep. The small fleet was nearly smashed to pieces on the treacherous sandbars. The captain of the expedition, a pragmatic privateer with no personal stake in the colonists and a hold full of valuable Spanish goods, had seen enough. He would not risk his ships and his profits any further for what he saw as a fool's errand. Over White's desperate, furious protests, he gave the order. The search was over. The fleet was to turn east, away from the American coast, and set a course for the warmer, more profitable waters of the Caribbean. John White, a man who had crossed the ocean to fulfill a promise, could only stand on the deck and watch, helpless as the misty shores of the New World, and his last, best hope of ever seeing his daughter and granddaughter again, dissolved into the gray horizon. He would never return to America. He would die in Ireland a few years later, a broken man, haunted by the image of that single hopeful word he could never reach. And with his departure, the story of the colonists transforms. The logical solution he had found faded into the realm of speculation. The silence from Roanoke deepened, and over the next 400 years, the fate of the people he left behind would become America's great foundational myth, the story of the lost colony. To truly understand the puzzle, we cannot begin in 1590. We must rewind, because the fate of John White's colony was profoundly shaped by the failures of those who came before. This was not the first English attempt to colonize this land. It was the third, and the ghosts of the past expeditions haunted the ground on which the 1587 colony was built. The entire Roanoke venture was the dream of one of Elizabethan England's most brilliant and charismatic figures, Sir Walter Raleigh. He was a quintessential Renaissance man, a soldier, a spy, a poet, a historian, and a relentless promoter of English power. He saw the vast, uncharted territory of North America as England's destiny. It would be a base from which to attack the treasure fleets of Catholic Spain, a source of untold riches, and most importantly, the foundation of a new English empire to rival that of their greatest adversary. It was a vision fueled by national pride, Protestant fervor, and immense personal ambition. In 1584, Raleigh, who had been granted a royal charter for colonization, dispatched his first expedition. This was purely a reconnaissance mission, a voyage to scout a suitable location. It was a resounding success. The captains returned with glowing reports of a land they called Wingandacoa, describing it as a paradise on earth, a land of gentle natives, abundant fruit, and teeming wildlife. They had established friendly contact with the local Algonquian people, and to prove it, they brought two of them back to England, Manteo from the Croton tribe and Wanchese from the Roanoke tribe. The arrival of Manteo and Wanchese in London caused a sensation. They were living proof of this new world. They were presented at court, studied by scientists, and became crucial figures in Raleigh's plans. But their experiences in England set them on two divergent paths that would have profound consequences. Manteo, curious and open, became fascinated by English culture, and formed a genuine bond with his hosts. He saw the English as powerful potential allies. Wanchese, however, grew deeply skeptical. He saw the filth and poverty of London, witnessed the disease, and came to view English power not as a promise of alliance, but as a grave threat to his people and their way of life. This schism between them was a foreshadowing of the entire colonial encounter. Buoyed by the initial report, Raleigh sent his first true colony in 1585. This was not a settlement of families, but a military garrison of 108 men, mostly soldiers and veterans of the brutal wars in Ireland. Their commander was a man named Ralph Lane, a rigid, arrogant, and catastrophically inept leader. Their primary mission was not to farm or build a community, but to establish a military outpost and find gold. The colony was a disaster from the outset. Lane, driven by greed and paranoia, immediately alienated the local tribes. His men, unable or unwilling to farm, became completely dependent on the Algonquians for food, which they demanded as tribute rather than trading for it fairly. The search for non-existent gold mines led them on fruitless, starving expeditions deep into the interior. The relationship with the local Secotan tribe, led by a chief named Wangina, deteriorated rapidly. Lane's diplomacy consisted of kidnapping, intimidation, and violence. The final straw came when Lane, believing Wangina was plotting an attack, launched a preemptive strike. He and his men murdered Wangina and his advisors in cold blood. This single act of treachery poisoned the well of English-native relations for a generation. The English were no longer seen as visitors, but as treacherous, violent invaders. By the summer of 1586, the garrison was starving, surrounded by hostile tribes and desperate. When the famed sea captain Sir Francis Drake happened to visit the island, the entire colony eagerly abandoned their post and sailed home with him. The first Roanoke colony had ended in failure, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of bloodshed and deep-seated native mistrust. This is the toxic ground upon which John White's colony of 1587 was planted. Raleigh, learning from his mistakes, planned this second attempt differently. This was to be the city of Raleigh in Virginia. It would be a civil plantation, a true community. The colonists were families, men, women, and children. They were farmers, artisans, and laborers who were given grants of land. They were investors in the venture, stakeholders in its success. John White, the artist whose beautiful watercolors documented the first expedition, was appointed governor. But their plans went awry before they even set foot on shore. Their intended destination was not Roanoke. White's explicit orders from Raleigh were to stop at Roanoke only to pick up a small holding force of 15 men left by the previous expedition, and then to sail north to the Chesapeake Bay, a region with deep harbors and more fertile land. But the fleet's pilot, a Portuguese privateer named Simon Fernandez, had other ideas. Whether out of sheer impatience to get to the Caribbean for privateering, or some darker motive, he refused to sail further. He declared the season was too late, and he forced the 117 colonists ashore at the one place they were trying to avoid, the cursed, hostile island of Roanoke. Their worst fears were immediately realized. They found the fort built by Ralph Lane razed to the ground. Scattered nearby were the sun-bleached bones of the 15 men they were supposed to retrieve, killed by the now vengeful Secotan tribe. The local natives, led by the returned and now openly hostile Wanchis, refused to trade with them. Within days of their arrival, one of White's advisors, George Howe, was ambushed and killed while crabbing alone, his body found pierced with 16 arrows. The situation was dire. It was too late in the season to plant and harvest crops to see them through the winter. Their supplies, depleted by the long voyage, were dwindling fast. They were surrounded by enemies and had few friends. Manteo and his Croton tribe were their only reliable allies. It was in this atmosphere of escalating fear and desperation that the colonists came to a decision. They pleaded with their governor, John White, to return to England. He was the only one with the influence and the knowledge to make their case and bring back the aid they so desperately needed. White, torn between his duty as governor and his love for his family, reluctantly agreed. He departed in late August 1587, leaving behind his daughter, his granddaughter, and a promise he was fated to break. This context is absolutely critical to understanding the mystery. The colonists of 1587 were not naive idealists who simply waited patiently to be rescued. They were pragmatic survivors trapped in a deteriorating and dangerous situation. The idea that they would simply stay put on Roanoke Island, a place of bad blood and little food, for 3 years is illogical. They would have had a plan. And all the evidence suggests that plan was to follow their only true friends. For centuries, John White's interpretation that Croton meant a peaceful relocation to Hatteras Island was the leading theory. But it was a theory based on a single piece of evidence and a whole lot of faith. Without archaeological proof, the door was left open for darker, more dramatic speculations to take hold. Could the Spanish have found and annihilated them? The Spanish certainly viewed the English colony as a Protestant dagger, aimed at the heart of their Catholic American empire. They knew about it and wanted it gone. A Spanish expedition was dispatched from Florida in 1588 to find and destroy the settlement. But historical records show their ships were battered by storms, and they were forced to turn back before ever reaching Roanoke. In 1600, another Spanish vessel did explore the area, but its captain's log reports only seeing native campfires from a distance. There is no triumphant report of wiping out an English colony, an achievement they surely would have trumpeted across Europe. The Spanish theory, while logical, lacks a body. This brings us to the most enduring and popular theory, the one that has captivated the public imagination for generations: a violent massacre. This narrative posits that the local tribes, perhaps organized by the vengeful Wanchese, finally overwhelmed the settlement, slaughtering everyone. But this bloody scenario is contradicted by the very evidence John White found: the carefully dismantled houses, the absence of skeletons, the lack of any signs of battle, and most importantly, the missing Maltese cross, the prearranged distress signal. A scene of slaughter would have looked very different. Furthermore, subsequent English explorers, like those at the Jamestown settlement founded in 1607, heard persistent rumors from the native peoples of the region not of a great massacre, but of European survivors living among various tribes, some of them a generation removed from the original colonists. The massacre theory makes for great drama, but it simply doesn't fit the facts on the ground. And so for 400 years the mystery remained in this state of suspension, a historical cold case with no new leads. The lost colony remained lost, a ghost story on a desolate shore. But history is not a static thing. It is a living discipline, and new tools can unlock old secrets. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the field of historical archaeology began to provide the hard, tangible evidence that had been missing for so long. The first major breakthrough came, logically enough, from finally taking the primary clue seriously. An international team of archaeologists, led by Professor Mark Horton from the University of Bristol in the UK, and sponsored by the Croton Archaeological Society in the US, began a long-term, systematic excavation on Hatteras Island, the historical location of the main Croton village. For years they dug, sifting metric tons of coastal soil, patiently searching for any whisper of the colonists. And then they found it. It wasn't a single spectacular find like a treasure chest. Then the finds became more personal, more intimate. They unearthed the ornate hilt of a gentleman's rapier. They found a collection of lead shot and the metal eyelets or aglets from Elizabethan clothing. Most stunningly, they found a 16th-century English gold signet ring, its face bearing the crest of a prancing lion, believed to have belonged to a colonist named Kendall. This was not a trade good. This was a high-status, personal possession. The way these artifacts were found is the key. They weren't in a single trash pit suggesting a brief visit. They were scattered throughout the domestic areas of a large native village, mixed in with the everyday tools and refuse of the Croton people. This is the archaeological signature of cohabitation. It strongly suggests that English colonists were living there, sharing food, sharing homes, and sharing their lives with their native hosts. The science of historical archaeology was confirming for 100 years later what John White had believed all along. At least some, and likely a significant number, of the colonists had gone to Croton and assimilated into the tribe. But the story had another secret to reveal, a clue hidden in plain sight on John White's own map. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum were studying White's 1585 Virginia Pars map, a beautiful and detailed rendering of the North Carolina coast. A sharp-eyed researcher named Brent Lane of the First Colony Foundation noticed something odd. In an area over the mainland, at the confluence of the Chowan and Roanoke rivers about 50 miles inland from Roanoke Island, there was a small paper patch pasted onto the map. Another patch covered an area in the water. For centuries, these had been dismissed as simple repairs. But Lane wondered, were they correcting an error? Or were they concealing something? Using a battery of modern imaging technology, X-ray spectroscopy, infrared, ultraviolet, and light table analysis, they peered beneath the surface of the 400-year-old paper. And there, hidden beneath the inland patch, was a symbol, drawn in what appeared to be sympathetic ink, possibly made from milk and citrus juice, which would only become visible when heated. The symbol was a four-pointed star, colored in blue and red. In Elizabethan cartography, this was the conventional symbol for a fort. This was an archaeological bombshell. John White's own map contained a secret. It pointed to a second location, an inland fort, a Site X, that no one in the modern era had known existed. The location was strategically brilliant. It was on a high bluff overlooking the water, easily defensible. It was also, crucially, in the territory of the Chowanoke people, a tribe that, at the time, was friendly to the English. Could this have been Plan B? Did the colonists split up, hedging their bets? Did one group, perhaps the majority, head south to the relative safety of Croton Island, while a smaller, more adventurous party ventured west, up the rivers, to establish a new, secret settlement far from the dangers of the coast? This tantalizing new lead galvanized the archaeological community. The first colony foundation, led by archaeologist Nicholas Lachetti, began a series of targeted digs at the location indicated on the map, a place now known as Site X. For years they dug test pits, and once again, the stubborn North Carolina soil began to give up its secrets. They did not find the remains of a large palisade fort, but what they did find was just as significant. Scattered across the site in a concentration that suggested a small settlement, they found more shards of that same distinctive 16th-century English pottery, the Surrey-Hampshire border ware, the same type found 50 miles away on Hatteras Island. They found a grommet from an English sail. They found part of the handle of a rapier. They found a snaphaunce flint and an aglet, the tiny metal tip from an Elizabethan shoelace. The number of artifacts was small, but their presence in this specific, hidden location was undeniable. They suggested not a large colony, but a small encampment. Perhaps a handful of families had made their way up the river and were living, at least for a time, among the Chowanoke people. The story was becoming more complex, and in its complexity more clear. The colonists did not vanish into a puff of smoke. They made a series of rational choices. They assimilated. They broke into smaller groups and moved, some to the coast, some inland, seeking refuge and survival among the native peoples who were willing to take them in. The Great American Mystery was not a supernatural event or a bloody massacre. It was a story of migration, adaptation, and cultural merging. This emerging picture is the one most historians and archaeologists now embrace. It is logical, it is humane, and it is supported by a growing mountain of hard scientific evidence. The mystery is shifting. It's no longer about where they went, but about what became of them and their descendants. The clues for that may lie not just in the ground, but in oral traditions and even in DNA. For generations, the Lumbee people of North Carolina, a tribe whose origins are a mystery in themselves, have claimed descent from the lost colony. Their traditions speak of ancestors who could talk in a book, and many of them bear surnames Dare, Cooper, Stevens, Sampson that are a perfect match for the list of 1587 colonists. The puzzle is slowly, painstakingly being solved. But history is rarely a neat and tidy narrative. And there is one more set of clues we must confront, a set so controversial, so mired in accusations of fraud and whispers of truth, that many scholars still refuse to touch them. They are known as the Dare Stones. The story begins in the midst of the Great Depression, in 1937. A man named Lewis E. Hammond, a California native traveling through North Carolina as a food merchant, claimed he stumbled upon a curious, inscribed stone in a swamp near the Chowan River, not far from the modern-day Site X. The stone was a heavy piece of quartzite, its surface covered in crudely carved blocky letters. It appeared to be a message from the past, a desperate last testament. When the inscription was transcribed, It told a harrowing story. It was signed with the initials E.W. Eleanor White Dare, John White's daughter. The message, carved in a frantic first-person narrative, claimed that after White's departure, the colony was ravaged by sickness and constant attack from hostile natives. 2/3 of the colonists, including her own husband Ananias Dare, had died. The survivors, a small desperate band, had fled inland. The message ends with a heart-wrenching plea for her father to bring help, and gives the names of the dead. It was a potential Rosetta Stone for the Roanoke mystery, a voice from the heart of the tragedy. The stone was brought to scholars at Emory University in Georgia. They were cautiously intrigued. A team led by historian Haywood Pierce Jr. examined it. The Elizabethan English, with its idiosyncratic spellings and grammar, seemed plausible. The narrative fit the known facts. They announced a public reward for anyone who could find more stones that might continue the story. And that is when the story takes a sharp turn into the bizarre. Over the next 3 years, a humble stonecutter from rural Georgia named Bill Eberhart began discovering a series of 47 more Dare stones. Each stone continued the epic, tragic narrative. They told a story of the survivors wandering through the wilderness, of intermarriage with friendly natives, of the life of Virginia Dare, and of a final apocalyptic massacre that left only 7 survivors. It was a dramatic, sensational tale. It was also almost certainly a hoax. Eberhart's stones were quickly found to be riddled with anachronisms, linguistic errors, and historical inconsistencies. The narrative felt more like a Hollywood script than a 16th century account. It became clear that Eberhart, a man with a checkered past, was carving the stones himself to collect the reward money. The entire Dare stone affair was publicly discredited, becoming a byword for academic embarrassment. The stones were packed away in a university basement, a monument to scholarly gullibility. But what about the first stone? The Chowan stone, the one found by Lewis Hammond, before the fraudster Eberhart ever entered the picture. For decades it was tainted by association. But in recent years, a new generation of scholars and scientists has begun to re-examine that original stone with fresh eyes. Geologists have confirmed the stone itself is a type of vein quartz consistent with the region where it was found. Toolmark analysis suggests the carving style is different from the Eberhart forgeries. And some historians, like Professor David LaVerre, have argued that the language and dialect on the first stone are far more authentic to the 16th century than those on the fakes. They argue that it is plausible that Eberhart found or heard about the first genuine stone and used it as a template for his elaborate fraud. If the first Dare stone is real, it profoundly complicates the tidy assimilation theory. It suggests that at least one group of colonists did not have a peaceful transition, but suffered a period of horrific death and violence before a desperate flight inland. It adds a layer of deep tragedy back into the narrative. The Chowan Dare stone hangs over the Roanoke mystery like a question mark, a tantalizing, untrustworthy ghost. It is a powerful reminder that even as science brings us closer to the truth, there are still layers to this story that may be forever shrouded in doubt. So, where does this leave us, the historical detectives of the 21st century? We stand at a fascinating crossroads. The old romantic supernatural tale of a colony that vanished into thin air is itself vanishing. It is being replaced by a more complex, more fragmented, and far more human story. The compelling evidence from Hatteras Island and Site X tells a powerful tale of survival and strategic assimilation. The Roanoke colony was not, in the end, a lost colony. It was an absorbed colony. Faced with the certainty of starvation and the threat of attack, the colonists made a series of logical choices. They abandoned their failed settlement and went to live with the native peoples who could help them survive. They broke into smaller groups, melted into the vastness of 16th century America, and over the course of generations, their English bloodlines, their language, and their stories faded into the rich, complex tapestry of Native American life. The mystery is no longer did they vanish? The questions we now ask are deeper and more personal. What did their lives look like after they made that choice? How long did they maintain their English identity? What was life like for Virginia Dare, the first English child of America, growing up in a Croton village? These are questions we may never answer fully. The solution to the Roanoke mystery may not be a single dramatic revelation, but a slow, patient assembly of 1,000 tiny clues, a shard of pottery, a gold ring, a secret symbol on a map, and perhaps a single lonely message carved on a stone. The colonists of Roanoke did not disappear. They became Americans in a way Sir Walter Raleigh could never have imagined, blending their blood and their culture with the people of the very land they had come to claim. Their story is not a ghost story. It is the first secret and unwritten chapter of the American story itself. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the shifting sands of the Roanoke mystery. It is a powerful reminder that history is not a set of facts carved in stone, but a living investigation, where the ghosts of the past can still speak to us, if we are patient enough to listen to the whispers they left behind in the soil. Now, I'm truly curious to hear your thoughts. Based on the evidence we've explored, do you believe the mystery is essentially solved? A story of assimilation and survival? Or do you think the haunting message of the first Dare stone points to a darker, more tragic truth we have yet to fully uncover? What part of this enduring American mystery captivates you the most? Please share your own theories and opinions in the comments below. I look forward to reading how you piece together the clues of this fascinating case. If you enjoyed this journey with me, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And don't forget to click that notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when we set out on our next historical investigation. Until then, may your own mysteries be few, and may your nights be peaceful.